All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at the completely wild, unbelievable, chronological history of global football, or soccer, depending on where you're tuning in from. Imagine taking a journey from these ancient, mythic stone courts all the way up to the massive, multi-billion-dollar modern stadiums we see today. It's a sweeping story of human culture, and it's honestly fascinating. So, right off the bat, you have to ask yourself, how in the world did a game that historically featured royal bands, absolute mob chaos, and even literal human sacrifice somehow become the highly regulated, mathematically precise global spectacle we know today? We're going to juxtapose the absolute deadly seriousness of football's past with the organized sport we all watch on our screens every weekend. Okay, let's start at the very beginning. Section 1, Ancient Roots of the Game. Rituals, warfare, and the first kick. It's really interesting when you contrast two of the earliest structured forms of kicking a ball. On one hand, we have Chinese Cuju, which popped up around the 3rd century BCE during the Han Dynasty. It was this highly disciplined, agility-focused military training for cavaliers, where you'd kick a feather-stuffed ball through a central hoop, absolutely no hands allowed. Then on the other side of the world, we have the Mesoamerican ball game. Played at these incredible sites like Copan, this was way more cosmic and high stakes. Players used only their hips to bounce a heavy rubber ball through stone hoops, and the game itself frequently served as a literal proxy for warfare and land disputes. And, this wasn't just a fun weekend sport, it was deeply religious. The bouncing ball actually represented the sun, and the game symbolized the cosmic duality of life versus the underworld. In fact, those stone courts were considered literal portals to the underworld, and the stakes, incredibly visceral. Based on pre-Columbian iconography from places like El Tajín and Chichen Itza, these matches sometimes ended in actual human sacrifices. We're talking heart extraction and decapitation, all to appease the gods and ensure agricultural fertility. Moving right along in history, we enter Section 2, Medieval Mob Football, the crucible of chaos. So we're leaving those ancient stone courts behind and heading straight into the gritty, mud-splattered fields of 12th century England. Mob football was basically pure kinetic energy. Imagine literally hundreds of villagers from neighboring parishes just clashing over an inflated pig's bladder. They'd surge across rivers, open fields, and narrow cobblestone streets, and the goals could be local watermills that were miles apart. It served as a crucial agrarian safety valve during holidays like Shrove Tuesday. The rules? Basically non-existent. As long as you avoided outright murder or manslaughter, almost any other kind of violence was entirely permitted. To really put the sheer danger of these matches into perspective, listen to this totally visceral anecdote from 1321. A canon named William was playing in a massive mob match in Scoldham. The game was so incredibly chaotic that his friend, also named William, accidentally ran into him and impaled himself on a sheathed knife the canon happened to be carrying. Tragically, the friend died 6 days later. It was just a completely wild, uncontainable environment. Now, you can probably guess that medieval kings absolutely despised this game. They saw it as a massive disruption to urban order and, maybe more importantly, a distraction from mandatory archery training, which was absolutely vital for national defense at the time. In 1314, Edward II banned it in London. In 1331, Philip VI banned the French version, called La Soule, and by 1457, James II had banned it in Scotland. They just kept issuing repeated decrees to stop the madness, but people just kept playing anyway. Check out the actual text from a 1314 parchment issued by the Lord Mayor of London. As there is great noise in the city caused by hustling over large footballs, we command and forbid on behalf of the king. Getting caught playing the sport literally carried the pain of imprisonment. Oh, and fun fact here, this is actually the first recorded use of the word football in the English language. Which brings us to Section 3, 1863, Rules of the Game, Drawing the Line in the Mud. Okay, so we're officially swapping out the muddy medieval fields for the polished mahogany of Victorian London, late 1863. Representatives from 11 London clubs and schools gather for a series of polite but incredibly intense drawing room meetings at the Freemasons' Tavern. They vigorously debated philosophical playing styles, trying to finally create a universal code. Ultimately, a guy named Ebenezer Cobb Morley drafted the original laws of the game, which led directly to the formation of the Football Association. But, it wasn't exactly a peaceful agreement. A massive fundamental split occurred right there in that tavern. Ebenezer Cobb Morley championed a kicking and dribbling game. But on the flip side, you had F.M. Campbell of Blackheath FC, who passionately defended carrying and hacking.
And yes, that literally meant carrying the ball with your hands and kicking your opponents below the knee. When hacking was finally banned, Blackheath actually stormed out in protest and eventually helped form the sport of rugby.
So, what about foul play? Well, Victorian gentlemen kind of just assumed that no proper gentleman would ever deliberately commit a foul. It was unthinkable to them. But as the game got more and more competitive, reality set in. In 1891, they reluctantly introduced the penalty kick to punish deliberate fouls. And I absolutely love this. They originally called it the kick of death, just a brilliant touch of dramatic, absurdist 19th century humor.
That perfectly sets up Section 4, the first World Cup, Uruguay 1930. The game finally had its rules, and now it was time for a truly global platform. 93,000. That is how many sun-drenched, vibrant supporters packed into the newly built Estadio Centenario in Montevideo for the final match between Uruguay and Argentina. To manage the sheer scale of the crowds, the stadium gates had to open at 8 in the morning, a full 6 hours before kickoff. But as organized as it was supposed to be, it was still totally full of wild logistical anomalies. Take the 15-meter penalty. A Bolivian referee awarded a penalty but manually paced out 18 exaggerated strides, placing the ball 15 meters away from the goal. Or the early whistle. A Brazilian referee blew for full time 6 minutes early while a French player was on a clean breakaway. The police actually had to intervene to get players back out of the showers. And my absolute favorite, the police assist. A ball went a yard out of play and a local policeman casually kicked it back onto the pitch, which led straight to a goal for Uruguay. And the referee actually allowed it. With all that absolute chaos going on, you have to ask who on earth would want to referee the final. Enter John Lengenis from Belgium. But before agreeing to officiate such a volatile match, he made his terror very known. He demanded guaranteed personal bodyguards, a swift boat ticket back to Europe just in case things turned ugly, and his full travel expenses paid entirely up front. Believe it or not, FIFA agreed, and the match went on. And the final itself actually started with an absurd locker room standoff over the ball. The two teams literally couldn't agree on which one to use, so FIFA had to intervene. The first half was played with Argentina's lighter Scottish-made ball, and Argentina went up 2-1. But the second half was played with Uruguay's heavier English-made ball. The entire tactical flow of the game changed immediately. Uruguay scored 3 unanswered goals, won 4-2, and became the very first World Cup champions. Let's wrap up with Section 5, World Cup Legends, Shaping the Modern Spectacle. This newly minted global platform pretty much instantly birthed these incredible, character-driven legends. Take Hector Castro. He actually lost his right forearm in a childhood accident. Yet, he not only played in that 1930 final, he scored the final goal for Uruguay, becoming the first disabled World Cup winner. It just goes to show how spectacular, gritty individuals really thrived as the game was finding its footing. And from those early rudimentary kicking games, the sport rapidly evolved into a complex chess match on grass. We moved from the WM formation to the rigid defensive locks of Italian catenaccio to the beautiful fluidity of Dutch total football. Then came Arrigo Sacchi's high-pressing 4-4-2, eventually leading right up to the possession-heavy modern tiki-taka we see today. It's a constant, never-ending cycle of tactical innovation. But here's the thing. Despite all these strict modern rules and incredibly rigid tactical systems, the wild ingenuity of the human spirit still completely defines the game. This magic was captured perfectly by commentator Victor Hugo Morales when talking about Diego Maradona's legendary solo goal in 1986 against England. He said, "The cosmic kite, what planet did you come from?" It really captures that pure magic that structured rules could never completely tame. Which leaves us with this one final, provocative thought. We've traced this game from ancient ritual sacrifices and mud-soaked mob brawls, all the way to meticulously groomed pitches and global superstars. It is just an unstoppable, ever-changing human pastime. So, from here, what will the next 2,000 years of football look like? Think about that. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the big questions.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer, where we are taking a seriously cinematic journey through the epic, kind of turbulent, and absolutely fascinating story of Indian football. Now, I know for a lot of folks, India is purely a cricketing nation, right? But as we unpack the history, the crazy triumphs, and the recent resurgence of the beautiful game over there, you're going to see a narrative that is literally filled with unbelievable highs, crushing structural lows, and some absolutely legendary heroes. But before we get to the modern era, we really have to address the elephant in the room. It's basically the most famous myth in Asian sports history. Did India actually pull out of the 1950 FIFA World Cup in Brazil simply because they weren't allowed to play without boots? Seriously? Barefoot in the World Cup? Let's talk about it. To get to the actual truth, here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the barefoot myth. Second, India's football golden era. Third, the absolute legends, PK and Chuni. Fourth, the evolution of domestic leagues. And fifth, the incredible rise of women's football. Section 1. The barefoot myth. Let's crack open this first chapter and finally separate the absolute truth from the legends when it comes to the 1948 Olympics and that infamous 1950 World Cup.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact attitude of the Indian team back then. So this is a real quote from the Indian captain Talamaran Ao during a press conference at the 1948 London Olympics. India had just played France, and yeah, they missed 2 penalties, but they gave the French an absolute run for their money before losing 2-1. The British press, they were completely mesmerized. Why? Because the Indians were playing completely barefoot. When the reporters asked him about it, Captain Ao delivered this witty gem, saying, "Well, you see, we play football in India, whereas you play bootball." Boom. He won over the London crowds instantly.
So, when India qualified by default for the 1950 World Cup and FIFA went ahead and enacted a rule banning barefoot play, well, the legend was born that India boycotted in protest. It sounds great, right? The reality, though, was way more administrative. The All India Football Federation was actually facing super high travel costs to get all the way to Brazil, a serious lack of practice time, and some messy internal selection issues. But most importantly, back then, they literally just valued the Olympics far more than the newly established FIFA World Cup. In fact, the legendary captain Silan Manna later admitted that the barefoot ban was mostly just a convenient excuse to cover up all those administrative headaches.
Section 2, India's football golden era. Because honestly, regardless of missing the 1950 World Cup, what happened next was pure magic. Welcome to the true golden era of Indian football, all masterminded by the brilliantly forward-thinking coach S.A. Rahim.
Under Coach Rahim, India practically owned the continent. I mean, they secured the gold medal at the 1951 Asian Games in New Delhi by beating Iran 1-0, and then they did it all over again in 1962, taking down South Korea 2-1. And get this, in that 1962 final, their legendary defender Jarnail Singh played with literal stitches in his head. Oh, and he ended up scoring the winning goal with a header. I mean, that is exactly the kind of fearless dominance we're talking about here.
But, perhaps their single greatest international achievement comes down to just one number: 4. Against all odds, India miraculously finished 4th at the 1956 Melbourne Olympics. They were basically propelled by Neville de Souza, who made history by becoming the very first Asian player ever to score a hat-trick at the Olympics. He absolutely devastated Australia 4-2 in the process. Just an incredible run.
Section 3. Legends, PK, and Chuni. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that behind every great era, you have these unforgettable characters. And for India, 2 names stand head and shoulders above the rest during this golden age.
Honestly, if you were writing a Hollywood script, you could not invent a better dynamic. On the left, you've got PK Banerjee. He came from super humble beginnings in Jamshedpur, desperately needed a job just to support his family, and played his absolute heart out for the pretty unglamorous Eastern Railway side. Then, on the right, you have Chuni Goswami. He was the glamorous poster boy from an upscale Kolkata family, basically the ultimate jewel of the massive Mohun Bagan club. Chuni was so charismatic and ridiculously good-looking that he was actually offered roles in movies. They were total buddy cop opposites.
But you put them on the pitch together? Oh man, it was pure unstoppable fireworks. Despite their wildly different paths to greatness, PK and Chuni formed the absolute core of the national team for a solid decade. And when you paired them alongside the brilliant Tulsidas Balaram, they created the most lethal attacking trio in all of Asia. They were the actual co-architects of that famous 1962 Asian Games gold we just talked about. Section 4. Evolution of domestic leagues. Let's move to the modern era and see how this builds. Because while the national team kind of saw a decline after the 1960s, the domestic club scene underwent this massive and, honestly, incredibly turbulent transformation. Trying to actually establish a professional league in India has been a pretty bumpy ride, to say the least. For decades, football was really just regional cup tournaments. Finally, in 1996, the National Football League, or NFL, was launched to try and bring a European-style format to India. And this era would soon be defined by absolute legends like the Sikkimese sniper himself, Baichung Bhutia. But man, due to immense financial struggles. We're talking clubs losing millions of rupees. The whole thing was completely rebranded as the I-League in 2007. Then, the landscape shifted seismically again in 2014. That's when they launched the franchise-based Indian Super League, the ISL, which eventually overtook the I-League to become the official top tier in 2019.
This ISL basically changed everything about how Indian domestic football was consumed. Unlike traditional European leagues, the ISL historically had zero promotion or relegation. It was a closed franchise model. It also featured this knockout semifinal and final format just to crown the champion. But the thing that really grabbed global headlines was its ability to attract massive, albeit aging, international stars right out of the gate. I mean, we are talking huge names like Alessandro Del Piero, Nicolas Anelka, and Roberto Carlos actually coming to play in India. It was wild.
And right out of this modern domestic restructuring emerged a brand new national talisman to take the baton from Baichung Bhutia, the one and only Sunil Chhetri. During India's big return to the AFC Asian Cup in 2011, which, by the way, was after a massive 27-year absence, Chhetri really proved he could compete at the highest level. He scored twice against Bahrain and once against South Korea, completely carrying the torch for a whole new generation of players.
Section 5. Rise of Women's Football. And listen, we absolutely cannot talk about the future of Indian football without talking about what is perhaps the most inspiring chapter of this entire story. Let's look at the incredible journey of the Indian women's team.
What a lot of people don't actually realize is that back in the mid-1970s through the early 80s, the Indian women's national team was genuinely among the absolute best in Asia, period. They achieved incredible success, remarkably becoming the runners-up in both the 1979 and 1983 AFC Women's Asian Cups. So they have this really rich, deeply ingrained legacy on the continent that often gets overlooked. And that legacy? It was built by absolute pioneers who had to fight through immense, deeply rooted systemic challenges just to achieve greatness. You have players like Bem Bem Devi, who debuted for the senior team when she was only 15 years old and went on to win 3 Soft Cup titles. Or Bala Devi, who completely smashed glass ceilings in 2019 by signing a professional contract with the massive Scottish club Rangers. And today, modern stars like Manisha Kalan are continuing that exact legacy, acting as an ongoing inspiration for thousands of young girls who are lacing up their boots across the country right now. So the crucial point here is, how does India actually capitalize on all this history and all this passion? Well, the answer is the All India Football Federation's Vision 2047 roadmap. After literally years of structural confusion, they are finally creating a definitive, connected, competitive pyramid. Starting in the 2022-23 season, they actually began promoting I-League champions up into the top-tier ISL, which brings true meritocracy back to the men's game. And crucially, this roadmap also mandates specific solutions to improve the minimum salary and the competitive environment for women. This ensures that both sides of the beautiful game can rise together.
Which really brings us to our final thought for this explainer. With the Vision 2047 roadmap actively attempting to fix decades of structural issues, and the frankly unstoppable, inspiring rise of the women's team pushing boundaries left and right, is the stage finally set? Will this new era of domestic stability and intense grassroots focus finally awaken the so-called sleeping giant of Asian football? The history is undeniably there. The passion is absolutely there. Now, we just get to watch the future unfold.